Welcome to Savage Kitchen. Today we are making my bourbon beef stew. Now, don't be intimidated. I know a lot of you follow me for the cocktail content, but this is related. I swear, there's bourbon involved. So I know I've got a lot of things on the table in front of me. If you check the description below, I'm going to have each ingredient with measurements. Also, if you go to my website, you will find this recipe. This recipe was part of a little mini cookbook I did with Noble Oak Bourbon last year, and it's something I've been making in my personal life for many years. It's great for a really cozy dinner party. It also freezes well, and when you're looking for comfort food, this is it. Tools that you are going to need. You need a heavy bottomed either stock pot or Dutch oven. You just don't want something that's too light and flimsy because this is gonna sit on the stove or in the oven for a couple of hours. 2, you're gonna want a tray or large plate to remove things to. This is a recipe that goes in stages. We're only cooking in one pot, but we're playing with time. So we're gonna cook one thing, remove it, cook another thing, remove it. So you need a place where all those things can go. They can go in the same thing together. Our food can touch, it's okay. But you want to be prepared with a dish that you can remove things to. Next, you're gonna need either a big bowl or just a Ziploc baggie for us to coat the beef. Other tools you're gonna need: some tongs, a slotted spoon, can opener, cutting board. I mean, things, you do you in your kitchen, but these are the things that you're gonna want on hand as you are cooking. Ingredients, and again, in the description below are the detailed measurements, but a brief overview. We have our beef, 2 different kinds of onions, a yellow onion and mini pearl onions. Then we have pancetta, white mushrooms, garlic, carrots, some thyme, some salt and pepper, olive oil, wine. Wine is essential for this recipe. Bourbon, and beef stock. Oh, and tomato paste. Almost forgot the tomato paste. Now, I have made this stew so many times. I have no idea. I usually make it twice a year. I've done it differently. Like, it's flexible, it's forgiving. It also scales easily. You could half all of the measurements I put below and have a stew that's good for like 3 to 4 people. You could double it and have a stew that's great for like 12 people. These portions that I'm doing today are very comfortable for about 6 people. 4 if you're like really hungry and have big eaters, but 6 people for a nice big portion served with bread and a salad. This is perfect. And the first thing I'm doing actually is opening the wine, which isn't strictly necessary, but I might want a glass. So that being said, I have a Cabernet in my recommendation for the wine for this recipe because I love a Cab, but also you could use a Merlot, you could use a Burgundy. This is definitely inspired by Julia Child's Beef Bourguignon, which uses Burgundy. I just wouldn't go with anything that's too sweet. You want something that's bold, maybe a little bit spicy, maybe a little bit dry. And if you like drinking it, bonus. So just a little bit of olive oil into our pan. We want to get this nice and hot. And the first thing that we're going to add is our pancetta. Now, if you can't find pancetta, you can absolutely use bacon. If you get pancetta, great. If you can get bacon, okay, it's also going to be good. I've done it both ways. Okay, so these have rendered down, I don't know, that took about 7 minutes, and I am going to remove it, but with a slotted spoon. I want to keep that rendered fat in the pan. Next, into our pan go our pearl onions. So I just want to get a little bit of brown going. Pearl onions are a pain in the ass to find. You can usually find them, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, in colder months, in the frozen food section. If you can find fresh pearl onions, highly recommend. Their texture is a little bit better. They're a little bit more labor intensive because you have to blanch them and pop the onion out to remove the skins, but the texture really is better. And adding these pearl onions is all about the texture. We have 2 types of onions in this dish. Both of them are adding layers of flavor, but the pearl onions are these perfect little bites that burst as you eat them. These are starting to blister a little bit and brown and caramelize. Woo! And they're absorbing the flavor of that pancetta as we go. So everything about this dish is about layering flavor on top of flavor on top of flavor. All right, but also don't stir it constantly. You need to just like sit so things can brown up. All right, these are looking lovely. And again, slotted spoon because we want to keep the grease in there, and we're going to remove them to our tray. So next up, we're going to add our mushrooms. Now, if your pan is too dry, if you didn't get enough rendered fat from your pancetta or your bacon, just add a little olive oil, like, it's gonna be okay. By doing this, we are reducing the moisture content of the mushrooms just a little bit. We're adding flavor to the mushrooms. So with the pancetta, we were around 7 minutes or so. With the onions, about the same. The mushrooms are gonna go a little bit quicker. You need to keep an eye on them a little bit more. Same thing as the pancetta with the mushrooms too. You can buy pre-sliced mushrooms. It is less expensive to buy whole mushrooms and slice them yourself. I never buy the pre-diced pancetta because I don't want to spend the money on it. I almost always buy the pre-sliced mushrooms because I don't want to spend the time on it. I'm a conundrum. Also, while your mushrooms are cooking, I should have done this right when I added them, but give them just like a little pinch of salt, maybe a couple turns of ground black pepper. While those mushrooms are finishing up, we're gonna get our beef ready. A lot of people wonder what beef is best for stew, and you actually want to choose the less expensive cuts because those fibrous tissues and those connective tissues that are found in something like a chuck roast, as you cook them longer, they release and they tenderize the meat and they flavor the liquids around it. So chuck roast is ideal. Short rib is great, but it's much more expensive and it's a little labor intensive because you're gonna have to pick the bones out when you're done. Same thing with oxtail. So I prefer a chuck roast. So into the bowl, our cubed beef, and I feel like I forgot to mention this in the beginning, you want about a cup of flour. You do not have to be precise in measuring this. And then we're gonna season this with a nice amount of salt, and then also cracked black pepper. And we're just coating the beef here, and then we're gonna sear it in our pot. You could also do this in a Ziploc bag and just shake, 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 shake. But I like to use a big bowl because I can go directly from bowl into pot to resting plate. All right, that's looking good. All right, our mushrooms are looking done, so let's remove these. So those mushrooms did their job and they soaked up a lot of that leftover grease from the pancetta, but to sear off our meat, I'm gonna add a touch more olive oil. Clean hands. We don't use gloves around here. If I were cooking for like strangers, I would, but like, come on. And we're just going to put a layer of beef in the bottom of the pan, and we don't want to crowd the pan here because the whole point is to brown the meat. So a couple things at play here. There's that very light coating of flour. We've got our salt and pepper. We've got fat in the pan, and we have a medium to high heat going. Now we need patience. You just have to let it sit and brown, flip the pieces over, let that side brown, and then remove. And you're gonna end up with leftover bits in the pan. That's okay. We want that. We want the fond. All right, you see this? I turned these too soon. They should be more brown than that. So I need to settle and just let it sit. We'll see. There we go. Similar to the pearl onions here, we're not trying to cook this through. We're trying to get a nice crust on the outside, and then sitting in the pot is gonna cook them through. But browning them and getting a nice crust on the outside adds more flavor and texture because boiled meats, personally, I'm not a fan. Now, my friends, this is where the magic happens. So you'll see in here, we've got all kinds of crackly, beefy, browned goodness. And now we add bourbon. You could do this with water. You could do this with the wine that you're gonna use. I like to use bourbon because bourbon. The reason I like to use bourbon though is that I like the flavors that this introduces to the overall dish. This cooks for so long at a high enough heat that the alcohol piece isn't an issue if you're trying to avoid alcohol. What we're doing here is just introducing a lot of flavor. But like I said, if you don't want to use bourbon, you don't have to. Woo. I'm gonna save just a little bit. Oh. The smell of boiling bourbon is amazing, by the way. Now I'm going to scrape up all of these beautiful brown bits. It's okay if you don't get a completely clean bottom of the pan. You just want to get the big stuff up because as this cooks with more liquid in it, all of those things are going to release and come up. Next step, we're going to add our chopped onions. And to this, I'm going to season these. Some salt, little cracked pepper. Now I'm adding my Minced garlic, 2-3 minutes till the onion is translucent. You don't want your garlic to burn. Next up, we're gonna add our carrots in. This is a stage if you wanna add any fresh herbs. I love thyme. It, to me, is the perfect herb for this dish. I always grow fresh thyme. Highly recommend. You could do rosemary. I do think rosemary, if you do it, I would sparingly use rosemary. It can be a little bit overpowering. I think we're gonna save the rest of this to garnish. And so we have less fat in the pan than we did before, so make sure to give this a stir every so often. If you notice things sticking, add a little more oil into the pan. Next up is going to be our tomato paste. I want to really coat the vegetables in this tomato paste and sort of break it down before we add our liquids. All right, that's looking good. Now we're going to take our wine and our beef stock. I've got 2 cups here. I've got more reserved. I would start with 2 cups, and if it gets too thick on you, you can add more. It's always hard to remove. Give that a stir. Wine. Just gonna add a lot of wine. Oh, way more. That's about 2/3 of the bottle. And so I'm reserving some wine, A, so I can drink it, but B, same as the beef stock. I just want a little extra liquid on hand, so as this cooks down and I'm tasting, if it needs a little something, I got a little something. That is just coming to a boil now. Perfect, so we're gonna reduce the heat and let this simmer and add back in all of our goodies. You're gonna see juices that have released from everything. It all goes in the pot. Just tuck everything in there, snug as a bug. Lid on. I'm gonna leave this on a simmer for like 2 hours. Now you can put this in an oven, the Dutch oven. It's going to have even heat all around the oven then and cook very easily. Or you can do it on a stovetop. The only thing I will caution you is if you do it on a stovetop, give it a stir every, I don't know, half hour or so, because it's getting that heat mostly from the bottom. Even though the rest of this is providing heat as well, it's gonna stick a little bit on the bottom unless you stir it up.
One eternity later.
And now for the moment of truth. So excited. I could have left this on the stove or in the oven longer. It just depends on how this thickens up, how thick you like it. This is a beautiful consistency. It's coating the back of the spoon nicely with like a little bit of a drip. It tastes perfect. If you want to do a little swirl of bourbon at the very end, you absolutely can. Keep in mind, if you do that, that bourbon is not going to cook off. You are going to taste that. The flavor complements this beautifully. It doesn't need it though. And considering who I'm going to be serving this, I'm going to abstain for right now. To serve it, I have these adorable little individual crock pots. And the fun thing about these is that you can fill the bowls up and then keep them in the oven and they're going to retain their heat and stay. So if you're trying to time a bunch of things for a party, these are great. The cuteness, I can't even stand it. And then I have a really nice country sourdough loaf that I'm gonna serve with this because the whole point of stew to me is a vehicle for bread to dip in the stew. Let's give this a little taste. A little piece of beef, a little pancetta. So that beef, after a couple hours in the liquid with the wine and the bourbon and all the other, and the beef stock, really tender. So if you're feeling ambitious and want to make the leap from cocktails to cooking with Savage Kitchen, highly recommend. I know there were a lot of steps. This requires a little bit of time and planning, but it is so, so worth it. Oh, honestly, can't wait to turn the cameras off and have dinner. Thank you for watching, for sticking with me through this, for all of the things, for liking and commenting and sharing. I so appreciate it. I have been enjoying this journey so much. I hope you guys enjoy this bourbon beef stew. Leave me a comment below. Let me know if you try it. Let me know if you have particular techniques and secret ingredients that you like in your stew. I love to hear your ideas. So until next time, cheers, friends.